Have you seen the YouTube channel Predictive History? So it has recently exploded and has nearly 1 million subscribers. A high school history professor named Professor Jiang teaches courses that would never be taught here in the United States. Courses about geopolitics, conspiracy theories, and secret societies. His courses include how power works, how societies collapse, how evil triumphs, dawn of the Jews. No topic or theory is untouched, and his candid way of saying the things people are typically afraid to say has created quite the following. And the channel went viral after one lecture correctly anticipated the Iran-Israel 12-day war. He's now predicting something even more ominous. He predicts in another viral video that Israel will become the next great empire controlling the entire world, that all the events happening now are a lead-in to their ultimate rise, what he calls Pax Judeica. And he does all of this from Beijing. Professor Jiang is a Canadian-Chinese professor who studied here in the United States at Yale with a degree in English literature. And he now teaches a high school course. Unbelievably, this is a high school course. And he films it, puts it on YouTube, uses predictive history and game theory to correctly predict the future. And it's been so far quite astonishing. I'm really excited to have this conversation with him. Professor Jiang, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Kim.
I am really excited for this conversation. I've been following your work for a while. I've been trying to get you on the show for a while. I don't know if you know that, but I've been messaging you on YouTube and all over the place ever since I saw much of your stuff going out there. But I think you're in hot demand. A lot of people want to talk to you. And so I really appreciate the time that you're taking to talk to us today. I want to start off with so your channel, Predictive History, which has just blown up. I mean, now you have almost 1 million subscribers, I think, on your channel. You do such amazing deep dive work, and you're using game theory and predictive history to, I guess, predict the future, right? Using predictive history to predict the future. So can you explain to everybody who's watching, who's maybe not familiar with game theory, for example, and predictive history? Tell us what those are.
Right. So the idea of predictive history is that there are certain patterns to human behavior that can be analyzed. And so if you do a deep analysis of past history, you should be able to develop certain frameworks and models for the understanding of human development. And then you can test and refine these models by making predictions about the future. And so that's what I do. Based on my understanding of history, I make certain assumptions about how things develop. And depending on my accuracy, then I can go back and refine these models and frameworks. And one tool that I use for analysis is game theory. The idea of game theory is that individuals perceive the world as a game in which they are trying to defeat other players. There are rules, there are incentives. And by understanding the worldview of these players, you can understand the psychology and how they behave. So in our world, obviously Trump and Putin are very important players. And so by understanding their psychology, you can better understand how they will behave in the future. And that's the very basis of what I do.
So you would have to know a lot of history in order to do predictive history toward the future, I would imagine.
Well, you would also need a complete view of history. So rather than me specializing in a particular area of history, for example, the Roman period or the British Empire, I try to have a macro picture of the entirety of human history, stretching from the Ice Age up to the Pax Americana, which is the age that we live in. And so on my YouTube channel, I go over every major period of human history and try to show patterns that emerge from these particular periods. And so I would say in our age, I see tremendous analogies between the Peloponnesian War and today's America. America really much is a falling empire, and the way that it behaves is very similar to how the Athenian Empire behaved when it collapsed.
Yeah, I think it does seem, many of us can see that right now it's a failing empire, or just towards the end of it. But this seems to be an empire that's been shorter lived than historical times. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, the American Empire is unique in that it spans the entire globe. right? So the Athenian Empire had control over the Aegean, but that was it. And the Aegean is a very small part of the world. America insists on maintaining hegemony throughout the entire world, in Africa, in South America, in Europe, in Asia. And that's not sustainable. And America had a tremendous advantage because of its technological edge, because of its aerial supremacy, because of the US dollar. But ultimately, this is not sustainable.
Yeah. This class that you're teaching on YouTube, this is an actual class. I mean, we don't ever see any students. Sometimes we hear questions from students. So you are teaching an actual course and you're filming it.
Right. So I'm actually a high school teacher, and I
Is this a
teach
high school
classes.
class? Is this a high school
This
class?
is a high school class in
Wow.
Beijing. Yes. I've been
So these
teaching
are
this class for the
Chinese
past.
students. I'm sorry, I'm just blown away by this. These are Chinese students in Beijing at a high school.
Right.
And this is high school
So next
level?
time, so next time you're in Beijing, please come to my class. You'll meet the students. You'll sit in the class. So what I do is I go to class. I set up the camera. I press record. I teach for an hour. Then I turn off the camera, and then I upload the video to YouTube. So what you're actually seeing is me teaching my class. And in the future, what I'm hoping to do is live stream my class so that students can actually, so viewers can actually participate in the class as I'm teaching it.
This is a normal high school in Beijing?
This is not a public school; it's a private school. Because in public school, students prepare for the college entrance examination for Chinese university. These are students who are intent on going abroad to study in America, primarily
Okay.
liberal arts colleges, such as Carleton. And so our primary language of instruction is English, and they need to have an understanding of Western history and Western philosophy in order to do well in America. And that's why I teach what I teach.
I mean, you're teaching something that I never heard this or learned this here in the United States. I mean, this is so you're giving them such a completely different perspective. I mean, it's amazing. And that's why I'm shocked by this. For one, I'm shocked because the level of material is, I think, I mean, I don't even know if college courses here in America teach this kind of thing. You know, we're to this level. You know, and these are just high school students, and they're absorbing all of this incredible information from you, where you're really able to lay it out. And you know, I notice in your videos you'll say often, this is conspiracy theory, you know, just so you know, this is a conspiracy theory, but here's the
Right.
theory. And I mean, you're saying things that are so raw and, I mean, shocking for, I mean, honestly, Western audiences. And I don't know if that's just the way, like, you could talk about things more openly in China. That's not what we're taught here. So what
Right.
gives?
Well,
How are you able to talk about things like conspiracies about Jews, for example, on your channel?
right.
Well, in
So,
your
so,
class.
I grew up in Canada, and I went to Yale College for university. I was an English major at Yale, and so I had a very traditional elite education. And eventually, I discovered that in life, this elite education has failed me, because you look at 2016, Trump's victory over Hillary Clinton. My elite education could not prepare me for that. Then you look at COVID. Then you look at the war in Ukraine. And so I felt as though that my elite education, and I received the best education possible, there were so many blind spots to this sort of education. And out of just personal curiosity, because I wanted to understand how the world really works, I began to, like many other people during this time, you know, during COVID, I began to really try to get a better grasp of how the world works. And, you know, back then I was listening to a lot of your, conversations and insights. And then I started to recognize that maybe these conspiracy theories have a point. So let's just, you know, just give them the benefit of the doubt and just see what happens if you apply their theories to how the world actually works. What you discovered is that actually their worldview offers a much more coherent understanding of the world than the elite education. The elite education I received at Yale was very, it didn't really connect the dots for me. And so I really wanted to connect the dots. And so it's really these past 2-3 years in which I've really engaged with with trying to figure out what happened in 9/11, with the moon landing, with JFK, with COVID, with all these things. And then I use this framework to try to understand human history. And then I recognize that if, with an open mind, I can better connect the dots. And so in my class, what I try to teach students is not facts. What I try to teach students is a certain attitude, a certain framework for understanding the world, which is to question things and try to connect the dots, even though connecting the dots may lead you to uncomfortable truths.
Yeah. And you're allowed to do this? I mean, and you don't get in trouble?
Right. So I operate in a very gray area in China. So public schools are monitored very heavily in China. There are certain textbooks that you must teach from. There's the test that you must take. And so China has extreme conformity in its education system. Private national schools are a gray area because these students are going abroad, and this is a minority of students. The Chinese government has not figured out how to best teach in these schools. So as long as you don't cross certain red lines, you're allowed to teach whatever you want. So, and the other thing is that what I teach in China is like off the wall. It's so wacky that most people sort of find it cognitive dissonance and they sort of tune off. So I operate in this like very murky gray area. And it's really weird because, as you point out, I would not be allowed to teach this anywhere else in the world. But
I mean, honestly.
given yeah. So,
it's incredible. And you're doing it in China, of all places.
That's right. And I could only do this in China, where, again, this gray area exists. 99% of all education is public. And then you have this very small percentage, which is private. And all this private, only a small percentage is actually progressive or experimental. And that's the school that I'm at.
So then my understanding from what I know about the Chinese education system, but of course, correct me if I'm wrong, but then these are international students. These are not Chinese nationals.
No, these are Chinese students who are planning to study abroad.
Oh, really? Because I thought that with that kids couldn't enroll in private school in China unless they were expats kids, basically. Like they could maybe be born in China and Chinese, but I suppose they would have to be, their parents would have to be international.
Right. There are different classifications. So you're talking about the international expat track, right? Schools that cater specifically to diplomats, the children of diplomats. And you need a foreign passport to enter these schools. And then you have the public schools. And then in between are these gray areas, schools that are experimental and international, in which you accept Chinese passport holders. And this is a recent phenomenon for the past 10 years.
Okay. So the Chinese government is kind of experimenting with these experimental schools, saying, we'll let some happen and see what happens.
That's right.
Wow.
That's right.
Only in China. Do you think you're able to say the things you say and speak so bluntly? I mean, it's so refreshing watching your stuff because you're so, you're academic, you're a professor, you're there teaching a course, you're doing it very academically, very logically, you're sticking to facts and real things. And even when you're talking about the conspiracy theories, you're still basing it on, these are the facts of what the conspiracies are, or these are the facts of the groups. And this is, what we know about them. I mean, you're able to, you're so academic, but you're saying things that are just, the rest of us cannot get away with. Even on I feel like on our YouTube channels, we can't actually, I mean, you're doing it on YouTube and you're able to do it, but you're able to just say things so bluntly that everybody's thinking, I mean, but people don't want to say, because if they say it, they sound like they're, they get called anti-Semitic, they get called, I mean, are you being called these names? Are you being called an anti-Semite because of your channel?
I actually get called a Mossad agent much more than any Semite, because, one of my arguments is that Israel will become the dominant nation in the Middle East. And so I get a lot of comments on YouTube saying that I must work for Mossad or for the CIA. Also, I've been called a CCP agent, a communist propagandist, because I talk so much trash about the Western world and I talk very little about China. So I've been called all sorts of names. But I'm usually not called an anti-Semitic, though. An anti-Semite.
Interesting. So, do you think that you're able to say the types of things that you say because the audience, like here in America, the United States is fiercely protective of Jews, and the if you just say one thing about Zionism or a criticism of Israel, suddenly you're an anti-Semite, right? So it's like it's an overbearing, overprotective attitude here. But I think more specifically in the United States than even in Europe or other parts of the Western world. But Asia, I don't know if Asia's had, there's not that same relationship to Jews that the West has, because the West has World War II and the history of World War II and the Holocaust. That was a Western war with the World War primarily. I mean, of course, Japan was involved in stuff, but for the most part, when the lens, particularly when it comes to Jews, that's a Western narrative inside of World War II, a Western story. So do you think that has made it to where Eastern people are like, what's the big deal about a conversation about this group of people? I mean, you're willing to have conversations about Muslims and Buddhists and, and Hindus and every other group. Like, why can't we have conversations about Jews now? Why not? I mean, do you think it's because of that sort of attitude, or what do you think that is?
I mean, the reality is that there's less emphasis on political correctness in China than in the United States, where in the United States, you have to be much more careful and cautious about what you say for fear of offending other groups. But in China, we don't have this concern because China is just one ethnicity, really. It's a homogeneous society. And so there just isn't that focus on political correctness. And so you're allowed to say certain things that could offend other groups. But the red line, of course, is you can't say things that offend the Communist Party. So there are certain red lines. As long as you respect these red lines, you're allowed to say and do whatever you want.
Okay. So as long as you just don't go against the government itself, then you're fine. I had a conversation with a friend the other day, and he was asking me, he says, well, would you rather live in China or here in the United States? Because I was showing him all these videos of China and how amazing China is now, and the cities and the villages. I mean, everything it's really the new world. I mean, just developing really rapidly. And if people really want to know the truth about China, I really recommend those kind of touristy like walking tour videos where no one's really saying anything. There's no narrative around it, but you can actually just see what places are like. And I like to do this in my free time, kind of all around the world, and explore through other people's lenses. And I was showing him all of this, and he says, wow, that's pretty amazing. And then he says, but would you rather live in the United States or China? And my answer was, well, I'd rather live in the United States, but that's because I'm a loudmouth political commentator. But if I weren't, and I were just like the average person who doesn't really think about politics much, they're busy with their lives, their families, their work, all these things, then yeah, China actually might be a great place to live if you don't care about government and politics. And if you're just focused on your own life, then it's probably great. But once you turn towards the government, I still have family living in that part of the world. And if I get into conversations with them online about politics, they say, we have to stop the conversation right now. And we have to,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
move on from
exactly.
that.
I'm very fond of the United States. I went to university there. Most of my friends are actually American because I respect the open-mindedness, the generosity, the tolerance of Americans. But I'm seeing what's happening in America, especially this past few days. And I'm just horrified. And I think this is a new normal. I think that America is heading towards a civil war. And I don't think there's any way out of this situation. It's a very dire predicament.
Well, let's get into that now, the predictive history of where we're at today.
Right.
Let's start with Donald Trump. A lot of people want to compare Donald Trump to a variety of historical figures, from FDR to Hitler. Where would you say who is he actually most like?
Well, Donald Trump is, first of all, a unique historical figure. But if I had to pick an analogy, I think he would be most similar to Julius Caesar. So let's go over to some aspects of Julius Caesar that resonates with Donald Trump. So Julius Caesar became powerful because he took his army into Gaul and he enslaved the population. So basically, Julius Caesar conducted this unwarranted war of imperialism against an innocent people, which made himself and his soldiers rich, and it made his soldiers extremely loyal to him as well. The patrician class in Rome became extremely annoyed with Caesar and wanted to indict him, basically impeach him. And so Caesar crossed the Rubicon and installed a military dictatorship. And so we're seeing a very similar situation play out in the United States as well, where Trump is creating these paramilitary forces like ICE and possibly the National Guard that are loyal only to him because only he will support their brutality. What we saw in Venezuela is the rise of Delta Force. So in the future, perhaps Delta Force will become the Praetorian Guard for Donald Trump. And what's driving all this is tremendous popular discontent, where people don't feel as though there's any hope of a better future. Remember, in 2020, the Democrats told the people, as long as we get rid of Donald Trump, things will go back to normal. And Joe Biden came into office, inflation hit record highs, and rather than trying to make lives better, Janet Yellen in the Treasury Department gaslighted people and told them, "Oh no, we're not really in a recession," even though everyone knew they were in a recession. When Putin invaded Ukraine, Biden imposed these sanctions that boomeranged against the American economy. Biden and his people should have negotiated for peace in Ukraine, but Biden insisted on a full-scale war with Ukraine, which has led to basically the collapse of the American empire throughout the world. So there's public discontent, but the Democrats do not have any solutions. As the midterms approach, the Democrats could be a party of no wars, of more wealth redistribution, but instead they have absolutely no policy ideas. And the only thing that they promise the people is we're not Trump, and we'll probably impeach Trump if we get into office. Mm-hmm. So so right now the choice for the people is not one between democracy and monarchy. It's really one between monarchy and oligarchy. And given this choice, historically, people choose to pick monarchy because the first thing that monarchs tend to do is they actually cancel the debt in something called the Jubilee. And that's a very common way for kings to cement popular support. So I imagine, if Donald Trump were to become king, and that is certainly his ambition, and he would cancel all debts, including student debt, including mortgages, and this would be tremendous relief to the American people. Okay, so I think Julius Caesar is the best analogy, and a lot of it is driven by incompetence among the ruling elite. The Democrats, the oligarchs, absolutely refuse to admit that they've done anything wrong. They refuse to admit that the America has become a corrupt oligarchy, and they have stymied any political changes, including Bernie Sanders. If Bernie Sanders had won in 2016 or 2020, then America and the world would be a very different place. So it's not just Trump; it's also this elite that enables Trump. Another thing that I will say is that what seems to be driving Trump is his thirst for revenge. Because, for Trump, the biggest trauma in his life is the 2020 election against Joe Biden, because he is absolutely convinced that he won the election. But Joe Biden, the Europeans, Obama conspired against him. And how? Well, first of all, you had the George Floyd protests in Minnesota, right? The Black Lives Matter protests. Then you had the COVID lockdowns. Then you had the mail-in ballots that swung the election in favor of Joe Biden at the very last minute. So we can see much of what he's doing as a revenge tour. So he hates the Europeans because he's convinced the Europeans conspired with Obama against him in 2020. And that's why we're seeing Trump being so antagonistic against the Europeans. That's one front. Another front is that, why did Trump go in and kidnap Maduro? Because I think what will happen during the trial of Maduro is that Maduro will tell the people that Venezuela participated in election fraud in 2020. He will present evidence that the election was rigged in 2020. And now what we're seeing in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, is, these ICE agents going around and wreaking havoc. And, how things will develop in in Minnesota is tremendously important because I think that there's a very strong likelihood that what Trump will do next few weeks is he will pardon Derek Chauvin. And this would set the nation on fire if he were to do that. But it plays very much into Trump's psychology. He's trying to create as much havoc as possible. He's really trying to instigate a civil war with his actions. I mean, how else can you explain the fact that you have these ICE agents going around America and besieging average American citizens? And remember, these ICE agents, their responsibility is to deport illegal immigrants. But guess what?
Right.
Under Obama, you had more illegal immigrants deported than under Trump, even though you have this paramilitary force called ICE going around and supposedly running up immigrants. I think their main job is to test out the possibility of a secret police in America. There's talk of there's plans to deploy the National Guard to all 50 states this year. So it seems as though they're trying to create the conditions for martial law, for martial law.
How could Trump, if he has the desire, you say, to become king? I mean, obviously, I don't know if America would go for an actual king. I don't think we would say,
Right.
okay, we're ushering in a monarch and the Trump family is now the monarchy. But there would be other ways to phrase it, I suppose, and to still have the same end result.
Well, I mean, let's consider what Julius Caesar did, right? So what Julius Caesar did was he created a myth of himself as this great conquering hero. And so that's why we see Trump instigate wars all around the world, right? So Trump went into Venezuela. He's talking about bombing Mexico and Colombia. And he's talking about taking over Greenland and Canada and Cuba. He's now considering attacks against Iran. And even though you and I are horrified by this, at a fundamental human psychological level, this inspires awe and fear among the people, which is what a great king tries to do. So Trump is trying to present himself, first and foremost, as this great conquering hero who will restore the American empire. That's number one. Number two is that, as I mentioned, he's trying to create military forces that are loyal only to him. Peter Hegseth last September, he said that the new military doctrine is the warrior ethos. We will disregard all rules of engagement. We will engage in maximum lethality. So he's really talking to a special group of people in the military, which is the special forces, the Delta Force, the Green Berets. These are people who are more sympathetic to this sort of rhetoric. And so they will eventually become the most loyal to Trump, which will allow Trump to engage in targeted assassinations, sabotage, infiltration, which is what he needs in order to basically get rid of his political opponents. That's number two. Number three is civil war, right? So to create us versus them mentality, one between left and right, Democrats and Republicans, where you're forced to pick sides. And in that situation, many people will rally around Trump. That's number three. Number four is to create a national emergency. It could be civil war, but it could be economic collapse as well. So basically, from a Trump perspective, the more chaos, the better, because it allows him to consolidate power. Then, of course, you have the Israel lobby. The Israel lobby is very much interested in a war against Iran. And, Netanyahu visited Trump, right before the New Year's in Mar-a-Lago. And what happened right afterwards? Well, you have the kidnapping of Maduro. You have these Iran protests. You have Trump saying that he will defend these protesters in Iran. This is not a coincidence. This is all part of a larger scheme to overthrow the Iran regime and cause collapse in Iran so that Israel can create the Greater Israel Project. And so if Trump is able to deliver this to Israel, then Israel will give Trump whatever he wants. So, Miriam Adelson has promised Trump $250 million if he were to run for a third term. Elon Musk has pledged $200 million for the midterms. So the resources of the Israel lobby cannot ever be overstated.
Everything you're saying, it makes me wonder. I mean, when Trump won his first term, and there was a lot of talk about, Trump wants to be a king, Trump wants to do XYZ thing, and there was a lot of Trump wants to, usher in martial law, Trump wants a civil war, Trump wants to be a king. And during his first term, I thought, wow, these people are really, Trump derangement syndrome. I mean, they're not seeing straight. But now with this term, I got to be honest, I sit there and I think, ugh. So there he is almost every day proving the Democrats right. I mean, he's proving those who were saying this guy is out for power. He's proving them correct almost every single day. I mean, he's sitting at the White House salivating over somebody giving him a Nobel Peace Prize. Like he's so, he's just so just focused on all of these strange things that are about boosting himself. I mean, it's just the most bizarre thing to ever see. But it makes me wonder, when you say, look, they would, because you've got people around him now, like you mentioned, Miriam Adelson and Steve Bannon and others, Alan Dershowitz, who are saying, yes, there is a possibility. There's an avenue for a third term. There's an avenue for him to not give up power. And they're trying to create those conditions. And then the question is, well, what the heck are those conditions? Because only really extreme situations would that be considered okay by the American people? You'd have to create chaos in order for that to happen. And it makes me wonder, now going backward to 2019, to the end of 2019, when COVID first came around, was that a plan of theirs? And then they tried that, and it turned out a pandemic was not enough to get us to stick with the same leader, right? We did still have an election. We did still make that change. But so if they tried, like you say, some sort of an emergency, well, they tried one of the biggest emergencies of our lifetime, probably the biggest emergency of our lifetime, which is COVID at this point. So what would they try next? And I think you might be right. It would have to be, I think, a civil war. I don't even think war with Iran would be enough, because we've been at war many times and we still switch over presidents. So it'd have to be a civil war, right?
It would have to be a civil war, exactly. And all the conditions are in place now for a civil war. You have a polarized information landscape where people just live in their own bubbles. So you look at the shooting in Minnesota, and both the left and the right are absolutely convinced they're right. The left is convinced that this is an innocent woman who was killed for no reason. The right is actually convinced that she is a provocateur. She went in to resist authority. She did this. She tried to run over the officer, and the officer did it in defense. And there's actually no reconciliation between these two sides. They all live in their own social media bubbles.
But is that going to lead? Is that enough historically? I mean, what has reeled people to the point of picking up a gun and shooting at their own family members? Because that's what happens in a civil war. Things have to get really bad.
Look, the reality is that both the Democrats and Republicans have certain paramilitary factions that will incentivize and propel a civil war. Okay, so the Republicans have these white nationalist groups, the Proud Boys. The Democrats have, Antifa. So these are street gangs that they can deploy in order to achieve certain political purposes. The reality is that the oligarchy benefits from a civil war because you have this massive discontent. And historically, either the people engage in a civil war or they engage in revolution. So do you prefer revolution or do you prefer civil war? Also, right now, what's happening in Washington is this massive conflict among certain deep state factions. And I don't think people really appreciate the level of conflict right now in Washington, D.C. And traditionally, historically, the way that these conflicts among the elite are settled is through civil war on the streets. The people are sacrificed in order to achieve certain political agendas. And so I think that what's going to happen is that over the next few weeks, Trump is going to continue to antagonize his opponents. ICE is going to provoke the people. You'll have random shootings of ICE agents. And then you have martial law, National Guard will come in. And these things can escalate really quickly. And then you'll have these secret agents, deep state agents, working among insurrection groups, organizing them, encouraging violence, teaching them how to sabotage. So if you just look at movies like Civil War and one battle after another, it's really predictive programming, right? They're really trying to get people in the mindset of civil war, because ultimately at the end of the day, civil war is what benefits the oligarchy. One, because it prevents people from recognizing the true enemies, the oligarchy, But also, remember that America is $38 trillion in debt. And so if your house is worth $1 million and you owe $10 million to the bank, what you do is you burn the house down and you collect the insurance money. And that's a game plan of the oligarchy.
Okay, so it sounds, I mean, this is pretty scary. It sounds, but it makes sense. We see it all the time on the national nation against nation level that elites will sit in their like Oval Office, or they'll sit, in their war rooms, or and they'll sit there and they'll throw bodies out of war. They'll throw soldiers out of war. And they don't even think twice about all of the young men and women who are going to be killed in civilians, children who are going to be killed in a war. And so you're saying that, like a soldier for the generals and the elites, the average citizen is actually a soldier for the oligarchs. They view us as the same sort of, they just view us as soldiers, and that we're going to fight their battles for them.
That is right. That is unfortunately right.
So what are the factions that you can sense that are fighting behind the scenes?
Well, I mean, the major faction is the one that is establishment, right? The establishment faction, which has been in power for the longest time, especially under Clinton and Obama, are they're nationalists, they're elite, they are basically these coastal liberal elites, or what we can say as a deep state. And now you have the rise of MAGA First. And MAGA First is supported by these tech oligarchs like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to overthrow the deep state to establish their own power. And I would say these are the two major factions. And then the left and right factions are the sort of like the veneer of this deeper conflict.
Yeah. So it's a deep state, an old guard deep state being ousted by the new guard deep state that wants to take over.
Exactly.
But there's still going to be a deep state.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And the new deep state is
It's
more
all
like
about power.
AI and surveillance, and they're bigger on,
Exactly.
it seems, that sort of, yeah.
Right. Exactly. So old guard is transnational capital, Wall Street, and then new deep state is Palantir, Silicon Valley, these people.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Oh, wow. Well, do we really want to be fighting for them? I think is what every average person needs to, and this, I'm glad we're having this conversation. It's going to make me think twice about falling into the trap of the culture wars. Although it's, it's not it's one of those things where it's going to be hard not to fall into that trap, because people are being killed. I mean, that woman was killed. And that officer's life is also going to be about to be ruined. Except I think you're right. Trump will probably pardon Derek Chauvin and then probably pardon this ICE officer as well. So this ICE officer, I don't think really has to worry.
Well, there won't be any trial for this ICE officer. And what's going to happen is that this ICE officer is going to get invited to the White House, and he'll be a guest of honor for Trump. And this will just enrage half of the population of America, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I mean, like Trump used to work in reality TV, right? The World Wrestling Federation. He knows how to push buttons. He knows how to piss people off so that they want to actually pick up arms.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, it's going to be hard not to fall into the trap of, is this what happened, or is that what happened, and everybody fighting with each other. Not with just that, but they're turning a lot of things into culture war issues that really should not be culture war. Like, for example, Gaza. That should just be a straightforward thing that everybody watches and is appalled by, but instead it's a culture war thing. If you're a crazy brain rot liberal, if you are against what Israel was doing and their plan to take over, that region.
Right.
So
I'm sorry to interrupt, but let's think about artificial intelligence. What the real purpose of artificial intelligence is, right? Now, right now, artificial intelligence is used to generate these silly videos and allow students to cheat on in school with ChatGPT, right? Is that really worth trillions of dollars? OpenAI is plans to spend $1.4 trillion on data centers over the next few years. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of data centers. So what's AI really used for? Well, AI is really used for surveillance technology, right? Digital currency, digital ID. But not only that, but with AI, we can actually create this individual matrix for you where you are just inundated with your own in your own media bubble, which just reinforces certain prejudices in you, and then you're provoked into action, right? So look at ChatGPT, where studies have shown us that ChatGPT has become psychotic, where you're suicidal. ChatGPT actually encourages you to kill yourself. Well, it's that's just a beta testing of the true AI surveillance technology, in which everyone lives in his own information bubble, and he or she is being emotionally manipulated to behave in a certain way.
Okay, let's talk about Pax Judeica. So you say right now we're in a Pax Americana, Pax America or Pax Americana? What's the right term?
Yeah, Pax
for that?
Americana. Pax Americana,
Okay.
yes.
And we're moving toward a Pax Judeica, which is what exactly?
Okay. So the year 1688, and this is the Glorious Revolution. This is when the King of England is overthrown by the nobility, and William of Orange, who is from the Dutch Republic, he's installed as the king. And this is significant because this creates the sovereignty of Parliament. So Parliament now is above the king. And what happens next is 1694, the creation of the Bank of England. And the Bank of England are these private interests, transnational capital. And the Bank of England, they are guaranteed by Parliament. And so this creates the idea that these private investors can lend money to the Bank of England, and if they make money, they keep their money. But if they lose money, then the Parliament, the people, guarantee their losses. So it's socialized losses, privatized gains. Okay, so this becomes the new model of global finance. Why this happens is that in Europe at this time, the world is in flames. The 30 Years' War, Protestants versus Catholics, and all these rich people, the Dutch Republic, the Habsburg Empire, the Catholic Church, they need to be able to store their wealth in a more safe place as the world burns. And the safest place at this time is of course, England, because it's being protected by the Royal Navy. And so all this capital shifts over to England, and it's stored in the Bank of England. These private investors have control over this capital, but it's guaranteed by both the Royal Navy as well as by Parliament. And this allows for the creation of the British Empire. And it's a fantastic model because, you fast forward 100 years and you have the rise of Napoleon. And Napoleon is this great conqueror, he conquers all of Europe. But Britain, through the Bank of England, they're able to finance 7 wars against Napoleon until Napoleon is finally defeated. And then England becomes the most dominant nation in the world. Okay, so this creates Pax Britannica. And then, after World War I, World War II, this creates Pax Americana. Why? Because if capital is able to move to England, it's also able to move to America, right? And then you have the creation of the Federal Reserve. But now that America is burning, where do you go now? Well, you go to Israel. Why? Because first of all, Israel has nuclear weapons. So Israel will be safe. Second of all, the Middle East has been destroyed, right? Israel has no competitors. Iraq, Libya, Syria, they've all been burned to the ground. Iran is the last on the list. And so once you burn Iran to the ground, then Israel has complete dominance over the Middle East, and it can just rebuild the Middle East in a new image. And this new image will be one of AI surveillance. So ideas that you have, right? AI, digital currency, digital ID, you're going to face a lot of stiff resistance in America because Americans like their freedom. But hey, the Middle East has been destroyed. You can now replace your populations with Filipinos, with Chinese, with Indians, and then you can insert microchips into the bloodstreams, and now you have this perfect, surveillance state where everyone is monitored. But not only is everyone monitored, their emotions are constantly being calibrated, being controlled by their surveillance state. And so you basically have a slave state, and then you introduce transhumanism, where all the rich people in the world, they can go to Jerusalem and experience all this transhumanist technology, organ transplants that allow them to live to 150 years. So that's the very idea of Pax Judeica, right? Capital needs to move to a more safe place, which is Israel, but also these oligarchs, they want to achieve a transhumanist humanist vision of the world. And so Israel has this technology, but also they want to create a surveillance state in order to maintain permanent control of the world. And that's Pax Judeica.
Well, it's proven that they can't really do that here, right? I mean, COVID really
That's
sort
right.
of proved that. During
Right.
COVID, I think that was an eye-opener for many of us, where I realized, wow, I'm glad I'm an American living in the United
That's
States,
right.
where I can live, I can move to a different state at least. Maybe my state's too harsh, but I can move to a different state. I could travel to a different part of the country and live how I want to live. And so many Americans completely rejected all of the mandates, rejected the surveillance, rejected all of that, more so than many parts of
And
the world. I
that's
mean, we
why
were
they've been throwing
shocked.
it down.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's
And that's
why.
why the elite needs to throw down America, because America is the greatest resistance to this Pax Judeica, this transhumanist AI surveillance agenda. Every other nation has
Yeah,
fallen, right? You look at Canada, you look at Europe, you look at China. Everyone else has fallen. The
yeah,
last opposition is America.
right. And maybe Africa. We don't really know what's going on there. I mean, they didn't with COVID. It's like non-existent in
Right.
Africa entirely, but I'm sure they've got mechanisms to get them under control here pretty soon. But yeah, you're right. The United States is the last bastion of actual freedom because there's just so many of us that are so
Yep.
resistant.
That's
So
right.
in that regard, they cannot actually stay here. The money, if you're saying the money moved from Pax Britannica to Pax Americana and it's going to move again, it's because they can't control the United States. They can't surveil it fast enough. Like there's just too many issues with that. So they've got to go where they can do all of that. And you're right. I mean, Israel has been one of the first to implement many of these measures, and they always do it under the
Well,
guise of security.
Gaza.
Yeah,
Gaza was an
yeah,
AI surveillance state for the longest time. So they have all this technology in place. They have all the systems in place. So
yeah,
I mean, like it's a proven model. They just have to scale it
yeah.
now.
So, certainly, I encourage everybody to watch your series, and the one in particular. I think it was Secretive History. Is that what it was? Your Secretive History
That's what
series, and then
history, yes.
you had the Pax, and then you had the Pax Judaica, kind of the finale, is
Yeah.
or one of the things that you talked about, and that is a frightening episode to watch. Everybody should watch it, but it's frightening because of how accurate it feels. Where it's like going from the Zionist, in a way that I hadn't even put it together, with the Battle of Gog and Magog, and the world goes and tries to topple Israel, and a lot of people thought, oh, that's what's happening now. It's that this battle is happening now. A lot of Christian Zionists, salivate at the idea that maybe it's happening right now, because that means the second coming is sooner than
That's right.
later. But your theory is no, that's actually in a little while longer. That's after Pax Judaica is formed, and the center of the world becomes Israel. And when that is the actual
Yes.
controlling new dominant center, I got to tell you. And then while I was watching your series and watching that episode in particular, when I went to Israel, um, and when I was there, I left feeling like, and I couldn't shake the feeling, and I just felt like this is going to be the new leader of the world. There's no way around
Yes.
it. They're going to be
I went to
the
Israel. I
next
went to
great
Israel as
power.
well, and I came away with the same feeling. Yeah, yeah, I hate to say this, but when you visit Israel and you actually talk to people and you experience the culture, they really do aspire to be the world leader. They believe it's their
And they
destiny.
will. And I
They
just think
will.
that they've got the ability to pull it off. I mean, you've got a population of very intelligent people, technologically advanced, developing tons of
Yes.
different, they've got a culture of development of all of AI, of surveillance, of security state stuff. So they've figured out how to infiltrate our governments and control our governments. They've got an entire, and there's a lot of big questions like, why didn't, there were other players in the world like China and Russia that could have helped stop the genocide that was going on in Gaza. They could have just, I had a guest on, Larry Johnson, last week, saying that they could have just done a blockade and just
Yeah.
said, we're going to economically sanction you until you stop doing what you're doing. But they didn't. And then that raises the question of why? Why didn't they step in? What kind of power does Israel have over them? Or what kind of relationship do they have that they're, and also one thing that I've always said is, Israel, this whole ally, our greatest ally, that's a one-way relationship. They will not stand with us. This is another thing I said to Larry Johnson, is I said to him, look, if war breaks out between us and everybody, which it looks like that's where it's headed, then Israel is going to play neutral. They're going to suddenly become Switzerland. I mean, they're going to be like, oh, you're at war between China and Russia? Like, oh, we're friends with everybody. We don't want to make, we're just going to sit this one out. And we're going to deliver orange juice. I mean, that's all they did for us. Out of all the wars that we've done, they delivered some orange juice during the Korean War. Other than that, and I think it'll be the same sort of thing. They'll be like, oh, gee, you know what? We got our own problems and we don't really want to get involved with all of you. Best of luck to everybody. We're friends with you all. And whoever in the end wins, we're here. We're still here, right? So it's very much beneficial to them for the rest of us to go to war with each other. And they end up being the global leader.
Well, that's how they maintain the Pax Judeica, which is very similar to the Pax Britannica, right? Because England is a very small nation and has very few resources. So the only way you can maintain power is by sowing discontent and chaos throughout the entire world. You can entirely blame World War I on the British. I mean, I know it's the Germans who got blamed, but it's really the British who caused World War I, and the census deaths of millions of people. Right, so Britain has been sowing chaos for a few hundred years, and I think Israel will use the same strategy.
Yeah, don't underestimate because of size, right? You do have the UK, Great Britain is a small place, and they still dominated a huge, massive amount of the world. Same Japan, Imperial Japan had a lot of power, tiny little place. So don't underestimate on size. Okay, so where are we at today? So here we are. It feels like we're always looming on the brink of World War III. For a minute there, especially when Trump was bombing Iran, I thought, oh no, here it is. It's beginning. And then it all calmed down, and I thought, okay, well, maybe not, and now it feels like we're ramping back up, especially with him saying he's going to go take everywhere. I mean, what country hasn't he named at this point? Where do you see with this predictive history, who's going to be battling who? When does it begin? Has it already begun? And who wins?
No, I would say we've been in World War III ever since 2022 when Russia invaded Ukraine, because that was a proxy war really between the United States and Russia, right? Because even though it was the Ukrainians who were fighting on the battlefield, it was NATO intelligence, NATO targeting, NATO special forces, NATO financing, NATO weaponry. It was everything that NATO had except its ground forces. So I would say we've been at war ever since 2022, but definitely this year things will ramp up, and the conflict will go global. Okay, so let's look at certain key hotspots. Right, so Ukraine will continue to be one of the major flashpoints of the world, because the Europeans will not give up Project Ukraine. You cannot afford to give up Project Ukraine because it'll go bankrupt otherwise. So you'll have European volunteers, European special forces going into Ukraine to show up their front lines, because it seems as though the Ukraine front lines will collapse at any moment. Okay, and they will continue to antagonize Russia and Putin. There was this silly attack against Putin's residence, trying to assassinate him a few weeks ago, which really angered Putin. And Putin basically said, forget this, no more negotiations. You guys are hopeless. This is all hopeless. Let's just finish this on the battlefield, okay? So I think Russia has basically decided that, no, we can only decide this on the battlefield. So this war in Ukraine will continue to escalate. The Europeans will move towards conscription, forced conscription, especially Germany. So you will see the remilitarization of Germany, which will antagonize the other European nations. Trump will continue to piss off the Europeans. Trump will continue to side with the Russians against the Europeans, because Trump, in his heart, really, really hates the Europeans. So that's the European-Russia front, okay? In the Americas, Trump will continue to exert dominance over the Western Hemisphere. The reason why is that in April, he visits Beijing. And this is a very key meeting for Trump. In fact, I believe that President Trump and President Xi are scheduled to meet 4 times this year, and the first will be April. And they have to work out a grand bargain, okay? So the conflict right now is that the United States needs China to continue to purchase U.S. dollars, because the U.S. dollars is this great Ponzi scheme. And if China switches to gold or tries to internationalize the yuan, this could cause a Ponzi scheme collapse. But at the same time, China still needs access to markets. And the great fear is that the United States uses its navy to embargo China, which is what you're seeing in Venezuela today. Okay, so they need to work out a grand bargain. And so what Trump needs to show President Xi is that I control the Western Hemisphere. I control Mexico. I control Venezuela. I control Brazil. I control Canada. I control Greenland. That's why there's all these provocations against Greenland at this time, and eventually you have provocations against Canada as well. Because the reason why is that China relies on the Western Hemisphere for access to silver, lithium, and copper, as well as other rare earth minerals, which fuels China's AI growth, its EV industry, its batteries, its solar panels. So its entire high-tech industry relies on these commodities from the Western Hemisphere. So if Trump decides to choke off China, then China's high-tech industry would suffer a great deal. And so I think eventually China and the United States will come to a grand bargain where, and so for example, look at Venezuela, where Trump has said that American companies will go and modernize the Venezuela oil industry. And guess what? These American companies, ExxonMobil, they're not going to do that because they have to invest tens of billions of dollars, and there's great risk involved because Trump is volatile, right? But the Chinese will. The Chinese will go and invest all this money and modernize the oil industry so that they can extract this oil to feed their own economy. China relies on 3/4 of its oil from overseas. Half of its oil supply comes from the Middle East. So if there's a war in Iran, then China's kind of screwed, right? So I think the grand bargain will be reached between China and the United States. The problem, though, is Japan, because as China becomes closer to the United States, Japan fears the rise of China, right? And the great issue is Taiwan. So both China and Japan rely on oil imports from the Middle East, and so they have to go through the Strait of Malacca. That's a main trade route. And so whoever controls Taiwan can choose to embargo the other nation. So, the Japanese Prime Minister Takahashi has said that Taiwan is of vital strategic interest to Japan, and she's correct. But that caused a huge political furor in China. And China right now wants to blockade, embargo Japan, deny Japan rare earth minerals. So this year, we're going to see this massive conflict arise between Japan and China because there's no way around it. These are both nations that are heavily dependent on trade, and they will get into each other's way. And this conflict benefits the United States because both China and the United States are heavy buyers of U.S. treasuries, right? So Trump can sell more weapons to Japan. So that's a play. But you will see increased hostility between China and Japan, even as relations between China and the United States improve. You'll see increased conflict between Russia and the United States in the oceans. Because right now the United States is engaged in piracy, right? The United States is going around and stealing these oil tankers from Russia and from China. And there was an incident where Bella 1, one of these shadow fleet tankers, it was being boarded by the U.S. Coast Guard, and the Russians intervened. So you'll see more of these incidents. And in fact, Russia will eventually figure out that even though it cannot defeat the United States in the oceans, it has to challenge the United States in the oceans. So it has to build up a blue water navy. And China will probably finance this blue water navy in order to protect its own trade interests. So the United States can produce one ship for every 250 ships that China produces, okay? So China has this tremendous shipbuilding capacity. And if the United States engages in this warfare against Russia in the seas, eventually a war of attrition will happen, and the United States Navy will face rapid decline. Okay, so I see how this is how I see the global landscape turning out. At the same time, United States, you have civil war emerge. You have civil war emerge probably in Europe as well. You have economic collapse everywhere. And then these nations won't be forced to scramble for resources and to protect trade access. So 2026 is when things accelerate. Trump will continue to be antagonistic. He'll continue to piss everyone off, the Europeans, the American left, we're headed for a very stormy for a very stormy time, a very turbulent time in our history. But this is a new normal. 2027 will be even worse because that's when I think that the United States will actually launch an invasion of Iran. So 2026 will be a great conflict between China and America as they try to reconcile the differences. And once they reconcile the differences, this will open up Iran for invasion. Because the great fear is that if the United States invades Iran at this point, Russia and China will support Iran. And there's a great possibility that the United States will lose this war. There's no way that Russia will abandon Iran, but China can be negotiated away from Iran. And that's Trump's game plan before he launches a full-scale invasion of Iran. Look, it's already been settled. There's already an agreement that the United States will go and invade Iran, because if the United States wants to maintain its imperial hegemony, it needs to control trade access. It needs to control Iran. Because once it controls Iran, then China is blockaded. The Belt and Road Initiative is dead. And now the entire Russian southern flank, okay, the southern bottom of Russia is open up, and Russia could be outflanked. So Iran is crucial to the maintenance of American hegemony. The question now is, when will this happen and how will this happen? So I think it will happen next year, not this year. And Trump needs to create this grand bargain with China before he moves ahead. Iran will also be a major flashpoint in 2026 because right now these protests in Iran, and we know exactly what's going to happen because we've seen this playbook before in Libya and Syria. What's going to happen is that Mossad is going to create these insurgent groups in Iran on the borderlands. They'll be protected by airstrikes and be financed by the CIA. You have these Mossad agents leading these groups, and you'll have slowly an economic blockade of Iran. You have sabotage, infiltration in Iran. You're going to hear a lot about Iran because the Americans, the Israelis, they'll try to create this narrative that any day now, the mullahs will flee to Moscow. Any day now, the regime will collapse. Any day now, the military will launch a coup d'etat against Iran. Any day now, these Iranian people will rise up and overthrow the regime. And look, the reality is that Iran is under tremendous pressure. And so you'll have this infiltration, you'll have these insurgent groups, you'll have warfare going on in Iran. So you'll hear a lot about Iran in 2026.
What are the chances none of this happens and we just go on and live our merry lives? And we just don't see a big world war again? What are the chances, do you think?
Yeah, I think we've crossed the Rubicon. I think we are in a new normal. I think it's very hard to go back to 2020. Like, I know that a lot of people believe that, in November, the Democrats will win the midterms and somehow we'll go back to normal. But think about who the Democrats will run in November. They'll probably run a lot of blue dogs, right? These candidates from the national security apparatus. And what do they want? They want Trump to accelerate these wars overseas. They want Trump to attack Iran. They want Trump to antagonize Russia, right? So I think we've crossed the Rubicon. I think we are in a brave world.
But it sounds like with the picture you're painting with this world war is that it's Russia versus Europe, it's Japan versus China, it's Israel versus Iran. But the United States is doing deals, it sounds like maybe to try to stay. I mean, besides a naval blockade style war, it sounds like the U.S. is, until the U.S. has to go and invade Iran on behalf of Israel, because probably what'll lead up to that is Israel's going to have to attack Iran, be in a war with Iran. Israel's going to have to start losing that war in order for the United States to rush in and help them out. If Israel's winning that war, the U.S. won't do that. So Israel would have to start losing that war, I think.
You also see a lot. You also see a lot of false flags in 2026, right? So these attacks against American interests in Iraq, in Syria, and basically and also possibly on the homeland as well. So I think you're right, but I would also add in the possibility of false flags as well.
False flags, okay. And that would piss off everybody, and they would say, "Go to war." That's it. Just like 9/11.
Yeah.
So other than the U.S. going into Iran, it sounds like you're saying the U.S. is going to try to not go to war with Russia. I mean, Trump doesn't seem to want that. I don't think we want war with China, and actually, I don't think China wants war with anybody. I mean, I feel like China doesn't want to get involved at all.
That's right.
Maybe financing,
that's right.
But that's it.
That's right. You're exactly right. Yes, China will engage in development, in financing, but that's it. It will not send in troops anywhere. Look, I mean, if you read the national security strategy, right, which is Trump's framework for the empire for the next 10 years, a lot of people believe that the national security strategy, it's about creating spheres of influence, right? A multipolar world where Russia controls Europe, China controls East Asia, and the United States stays within the Western Hemisphere. If you actually read the national security strategy, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that the United States will retreat back in the Western Hemisphere. What it does say is that the United States will maintain its empire through a new strategy. Before, it maintained its empire through these multilateral organizations like the United Nations. And now what the strategy is to abandon the illusion of these liberal multilateral organizations. Just leave the United Nations, which is what the United States has done, and focus on pure power politics. And it will use divide and rule in order to maintain control over the world. So it will not leave East Asia, but it will promote Japan as its proxy in the war against China. Okay, it's not going to leave Europe, but it's going to overthrow these liberal European regimes and instead champion nations like Austria, Hungary, and Poland, which are more aligned with Trump values. And it's going to fight in Africa for influence and economic dominance against China. The United States does not plan to cede anywhere. The United States will not retreat from anywhere, but it's going to change the rules of the game to meet the new reality of the American empire. Before, Americans were shy about empire. Before, Americans insist on the rules-based liberal international order. And Trump's like, screw that. We're an empire. Might is right. Let's just be an empire.
Where is the safest place in the world to be during all of this, would you say?
You know what? I have 3 kids. I'm trying to figure out the same thing. Okay. So look, I've been thinking about this for a long time. The problem is that wherever place you pick, everyone goes to, right? So, like, look, everyone believes that New Zealand will be safe, but if everyone's going to New Zealand, how safe is that, right? If Peter Thiel is building a bunker in New Zealand and all this money is flowing to New Zealand, that's going to create a lot of conflict and chaos as well. The reality is that natives don't like immigrants, So you go to Europe and you have all these immigrants and the natives hate that, and it'll probably create a race war in Britain. New Zealand is right now under a lot of strain. The natives are being priced out of the property market. So I wouldn't say it's about geography. I would say it's more about mindset. I think in this new world, you have to give up this materialist mindset where, you know what, I'm going to make $1 million, retire, buy myself a yacht, and enjoy the world. You have to focus on your own spiritual and philosophical development. You have to learn things. You have to watch the news. You have to be resilient. You have to think about what matters in life. What you have to recognize is that ultimately this world can go to chaos. But guess what? Most of human history has been chaos. But what matters to me is my family, my friends, my children, my community. If you focus on that, you will get past all this chaos. This chaos will not affect you if you're able to build a strong community and you're all focused on spiritual, personal fulfillment. I guarantee you'll live a very happy life if you do that. But if you're insistent on I have $10 million in the bank, so should I go investing in gold and silver? Should I move to Israel or New Zealand or Chile? You'll just drive yourself insane because this world is going to go crazy. And if you believe that you have $10 million and you can maintain this wealth during all this chaos, you'll just go insane. You have to give up the idea that wealth matters in this world. What matters at the end of the day is mindset, resilience, spirituality.
Well, Professor Jiang, thank you so much for being here and sharing with us your knowledge and the predictive history, the game theory. It is a scary time that we're marching into, but I agree with you. People live in war-torn areas. My mother grew up in one. People survive.
Right.
If you focus on the right things, you could get through it. And that is, so I like what you say there at the end. That is what we should be focusing on, realigning our values and what we value what we want to hold on to. So the YouTube channel is Predictive History. I do have the link down below. Definitely, more people should be watching you. You already have 1 million. You should have more than that soon enough. You're doing amazing work. Really, absolutely love everything that you're doing. So thank you so much and keep it up. And thank you so much for being here with us.
No, thanks so much, Kim. It was a wonderful first conversation. I would love to be back whenever you have time.
Would love to have you back. That's for sure. Thank you. Thank you again. Thank you for watching this clip from the full Kim Iverson show, which you can watch Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific at KimIversonShow.com. See you there.